Hello, producer Jonah here, and welcome to Season 4 of Principle of Charity. Once again, we have a terrific lineup of topics and guests for you, starting with, in celebration of the Oscars, which are happening right now, the spectacular Academy Award-winning Jane Campion. In fact, in our conversation today, Lloyd is the only person who hasn't won an Oscar, and embarrassingly enough, he hasn't even been nominated. Nevertheless, we have a great episode in store for you, and as always, if you're enjoying the show, please leave a review and spread the word about Principle of Charity. Over to Emile, Lloyd, and Jane.
Welcome to Principle of Charity. I'm Lloyd Vogelman and I'm here with my cousin and buddy Emile Sherman. We're here to inject some generosity and curiosity back into our conversations. Principle of Charity tells us to seek the truth, not win the fight. To first put aside our own views and try to understand the other viewpoint before we instinctively reject it. Now let's get on to today's Principle of Charity personal challenge. The Principle of Charity is about encouraging as much cooperation as possible. Which problems of cooperation do we face and how do we solve them? That's where game theory, a theory we have referred to often in the show, may be relevant. Game theory makes a principal distinction between zero-sum and non-zero-sum games. Zero-sum games are competitive interactions that have a winner and a loser. One's gain is another's loss. Non-zero-sum games are cooperative interactions that can have two winners. They are win-win situations. And so the Principle of Charity personal challenge this week is, when you are next in a conflict or disagreement, can you define how you and the other person can both come out winners? Today's episode is a spotlight episode where we focus in on the Principle of Charity itself. In these spotlight episodes, we bring on a guest whose work and interests helps us shine a light on a part of the Principle of Charity. So far, we've had Tim Minchin, we've had Jonathan Rauch, and most recently, Claire Lehman. Today, we are lucky enough to have enticed multi-Academy Award-winning writer and director Jane Campion onto the podcast to really burrow into creativity and how it can help us enter into the world of the other. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jane. Jane was born in New Zealand and has directed many feature films, including The Piano, for which she won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, becoming the first woman to receive this award. The film was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including nominations for Best Director and Best Original Screenplay, the latter of which she won. Thus far, Jane has received 2 Academy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, and 2 Golden Globe Awards, and many other prizes. Jane is also the only woman to be nominated twice for the Academy Award for Best Director. The 2-season limited series Top of the Lake, which Jane created, co-wrote, executive produced, and directed 5 of the 12 episodes, received 8 Emmy Award nominations. Most recently, her film, The Power of the Dog, was nominated for 12 Oscars, and she won Best Director, as well as winning countless other awards, including the BAFTA Award for Best Film. And Jane was appointed Dame Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit for services to film. Now, Emile, you know Jane very well, don't you?
I do indeed.
You produced The Power of the Dog with Jane and also produced both seasons of Top of the Lake. So you've been Jane's producing partner now for over a decade. And tell us a little bit more about the conversation today.
Thanks very much, Lloyd. Yeah, Jane is someone I've worked with for years, but also someone I call a friend. It's actually impossible to work with Jane without being connected deeply to her. She's just the sort of person who sees right through you and calls on the whole of you to be present, not just your work self. She's demanding, hugely insightful, deeply compassionate, but also playful and joyous. But above all, and most importantly for this episode, she's just hugely creative. Now, we've had a lot of incredible intellectuals on this podcast burrowing into all aspects of the Principle of Charity, but what we've been missing is this creative lens. Creativity, as I've been fortunate enough to witness and be part of over many decades, is an extraordinary movement towards the lives of others. It's an incredibly powerful muscle that forces you outside of yourself and into the most generous version of other experiences, as you can't create rich and believable characters unless you know them from the inside out. Now, given we're a podcast about curiosity, about truly hearing the most generous version of other viewpoints, I was excited to get on someone who can talk to us in a deep way about creativity and what it might offer for our endeavour, Lloyd. And by far the best person I could think of is Jane Campion. So let's bring her on. Well, welcome, Jane. I'm very fortunate to count you as not just a producing partner and a friend, but surprisingly a fan of this podcast. So before we delve into this conversation around creativity and the risk of sounding a little self-serving, I'd love to get your just brief thoughts on what has drawn you to this podcast. What connects you to what we're doing?
Well, when you sent me a link to it, it was probably, a year or so ago?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I listened to it and I was really surprised how taken I was by it. I think it was addressing something I was really struggling with in understanding politics in the world today. And this principle of charity, this idea that through giving up wanting to win and really investing in trying to understand whatever's been discussed, having a greater depth of understanding of it, that the gain was really much greater than the sort of push to just get your opinions through. And, I was guilty as charged, I push my opinions very strongly, get all worked up and, and don't actually enjoy it. So I really loved it and actually was, mouthing it around a few times.
You tried it out, didn't you, with some friends? You're like,
let's try it out. Yeah.
let's make this live. Let's take this to the streets.
Yeah, and I thought it was a great idea. And also I really enjoyed the people that you were talking to and some of the discussions. Like I just listened to another one recently about does inequality matter, for example, with
Russ Roberts.
Yeah. He's an economist and, the more you dug into him, the less it felt like he was convinced about his own of his own point, that he felt that, perhaps capitalism was still the best economic strategy, like prosperity, but he wasn't really sure about that even anymore.
It's interesting. If you ask the right questions, you can. And Russ is such a deep thinker; he's thought about all these things. But if the format's right, you can get some interesting responses. Well, let's jump into creativity because that's really what we want to burrow into with you, Jane. And the fictional lives you've created across your amazing body of work feel more three-dimensional than so many people I've met in real life. And I'm trying to understand, when you dream up characters and worlds, where does it come from? Does it feel like it's coming from inside you, or are you spending a lot of time observing other people, imagining what it's like to be them? Where do you feel like your creative worlds emerge from?
Yeah, well, I think just in brief, I would say all those things. However, I would say I've always been super curious about other people. And, as a child, it was notable that I was acted a bit like an anthropologist because my own family was so different or, they were theatre people. We didn't have hardly any family because my mother's two parents died when she was 9 and my father's family didn't exist for us. His dad was dead and his mother was a Plymouth Brethren and we weren't even allowed to see our grandmother. So I was very fascinated by other people's families, and if children invited me home to their house, they'd get quite disappointed because I'd be grilling their mother about how she did things, what was the dinner going to be, and I guess I thought they, probably owned normalcy, and that didn't happen in our place, and I was fascinated by, how to create that. But it just, anyway, ended up that I was a curious person and people would have to tell me to stop staring,
Yeah, right.
I didn't even realize I was doing it. So I think I'm just super interested in people and how we are, as humans. And then I think one of the big discoveries for me, in terms of creativity, was how to build a pathway to the subconscious. I didn't even know it was possible to do that, to be honest. I had no idea. I found out when I was at art school and I sat down to write a little script. And I thought I had a great topic. I can't remember what it was now, but I wrote 1.5 pages and I realized I'd run out of ideas and that it was complicated and that things had to intertwine with each other, you know, themes and characters and narrative, and I hadn't a clue. And I just thought, oh, God, you know, it seems like, you know, this is much harder than I've got the capacity for. You know, I think I have to admit I'm just not clever enough. That's really difficult. So I just put it away, and then I found myself going back to look at the notes 3 weeks later, and all the things I couldn't do then, I seemed to know what to do next, you know, without having done anything. And I started to realize that, oh, you know, if you can pose the right question, or like, you know, say, oh, this is where I'm stuck, or this is what I don't have the answer to.
Yourself, you're talking. Yeah, pose the right questions to yourself.
Pose the right questions yourself, or like name the thing you don't have. That, you know, your subconscious will work on it for you while you're asleep. I don't know how it does it. It's a mystery, but definitely, if there's an answer possible, it will come. You know, it will find it for you, and then I started to challenge it even further, like when I started to, you know, so I did manage to write a little script. And then when I was at film school and was trying to write my graduation film, I remember I had some ideas, like, you know, I was going to write something about being a 13, 14-year-old girl, like, you know, how it is to be a child going into adulthood with all the mystery of sexuality and emotions that kind of land on you and you don't understand how to manage. And so I had that as a sort of basic idea and one or two thoughts about it. And I just made myself sit down. I was visiting my parents on their farm and just locked myself in the room and sat down, not in a very comfortable way, at a coffee table, actually, I can remember. It was so memorable. Anyway, I sat there for 4 hours with nothing else but paper and a pen. I hadn't read about how to do this anywhere. I just did it, and I just tried writing out all sorts of stuff and just kept writing and writing in different things, and I didn't really know if I had any success, but the next day I was going to do the same thing. And I started off by rereading what I'd written, and I noticed that a lot of things that I thought that I wrote that were rubbish were actually really good, and things that I thought, oh, this is going to be good, you know, when I look back, that's clever, you know, seemed really obvious and empty. So it was like a kind of incredible the beginning of trusting this other resource.
And do you see, is your subconscious you then? Like, is this a relationship with yourself, or is it a relationship with some mysterious, you know, extra human
aliens? I think
who you have who you have to coax. Like, how do you?
Yeah, the elves, golden elves, you know, and spin. You know, golden outfits for you while you're asleep at night. I mean, I do think it's so mysterious. I don't even begin to know how it happens, but you know how we talk about synchronicity and things like that at times, or, you know, you think of somebody and the telephone rings and it's them. It has that sort of sense of connection with unknown forces.
But you have to cultivate that connection in a sense, don't you? You
have to give time.
The more you cultivate it, or make time, is it? Is it like you have to be available?
I think,
can you force it?
I don't think you can force it. That's the problem, Emile.
Yeah.
I think it requires time. I mean, I've since, you know, heard other people talking about their relationship with the same mysterious resource, and all of it has a similar bent to it, and that is that you allow time, and it's almost as like, you know, you're trying to befriend these little creatures in a forest, you know, and they're figuring out whether they're going to trust you or not. You know, are you going to spend the time here for them to trust you and come out and join you, you know, or are you going to give up after half an hour? And that's why I think, you know, often the best results come for me after, you know, in the 4th hour. Or that's why I think a lot of people, when they go to write or prepare material or think or paint or whatever, that sometimes they will go away. You know, I heard Paul Thomas Anderson talking about borrowing a friend's cabin somewhere really remote with, you know, a scary snake outside, which made sure he stayed inside, and how he did, you know, most of the writing for Magnolia there. And for me too, I really feel like that isolation and that last big push, or the big push, like you work day and night, it really brings to the fore all your imaginary or resources.
Yes.
Or the resources of the imagination. But now I come to actually really rely on it. I see it as another arm or leg or something like that it's so reliable.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant. And it really follows into my next question, which is about the industry that I guess we're both in, this film and TV industry, and you're a writer and a director and a producer, of course, and working to a time pressure. Like, I remember when I started out in the industry, I was working with a composer and couldn't believe that he came back overnight and had come up with a theme. And it's like, how do you create with deadlines? Can you make yourself be creative, or do you have to just make yourself available for creativity? And I'm thinking about, obviously, the different process. As a writer, you've got a lot more time, but still there are deadlines. But a director, when I see you on set and, you've spent 2 years thinking about this scene and you've got 1 day to shoot it, how do you be creative and, hear those voices from the other side when overtime gets called in 3 minutes?
I think the depth of creative possibility on set is reduced. You're not going to hear anything absolutely extraordinary. However, you do have to manage those stresses and pressures, like you were speaking about. And one thing I found when I first started directing was that I did have panic attacks.
Yeah.
On the set.
Yeah.
And it's the most horrible feeling, as anybody knows, when you have, panic and you're just free.
Yeah, it's the worst.
You can't think of anything.
Can't.
No.
You can't hear the elves, that's for sure.
No elves, no nothing. And so I sort of started to think about, oh, God, I can't have that happening all the time. And, it was partly to do with the fact that if things didn't go exactly the way that I was preparing for it, I didn't have any resources to pivot.
Yeah,
I didn't. I just, I was not flexible. So, like, to gain some flexibility or add flexibility to what I could do, like, my process is pretty, like, work heavy. What I would do if it's a really important scene is I'll draw it many, many times in different ways, because when I'm drawing, I love to, I'm thinking and I'm relaxed and I'm happy.
Yeah.
And then, I keep drawing it until I feel like, a little bit excited about the way that the scene could be shot. And then I start to think about all the difficulties of it. What sort of weather do we need to have? What would happen if it rained? Okay, I've talked about the scene on the hill and the power of the dog before. Well, on Queenstown Hill in the bad weather, you wouldn't be able to barely stand up, So there are really weather difficulties that just would make that. You have to tell the production office that can't be done that day. So you warn them ahead, and
you're trying to prepare as much as possible.
Yeah, you prepare, with some things you can, shoot it in the rain, shoot it in fine weather. And then you include rehearsal a little bit.
Yeah.
But, quite often actors like a lot of space to feel it for themselves, and you don't want to take that for them,
Yeah.
Feels like their creativity, and it is with actors of this, like Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons that, you really do want their input. So, yeah, and the weird thing is that strength of imagination or that practice of imagination on that scene seems to be that when you get there, you don't really have to look at your notes again. You've really thought of almost every possibility, and you feel like quite quickly you can respond to the opportunities that present themselves and know what's best. And I think the feeling of that you're doing the best job you can given the circumstances is about all you can hope for, And then you have to deal with that sense of anxiety that you aren't, that things aren't, this is an important scene, let's hope that everything plays out. And you can't put that pressure on anyone or the actors, or everybody knows that. So you just have to bring a light spirit to it. And I think for me, like, as I used to do yoga every day for about 20 years. And that really relaxed my body because I can be quite uptight. Now I do Renshu, which is a type of Qigong. Similar kind of takeaways from it, that focusing on the body, relaxing the body, not getting into your head. When you're in your head, that's when you panic, that's when you freeze. but just trusting the body's intelligence in these situations.
Yeah, and what I've noticed about your process is you protect very fiercely the creative space within which creativity can emerge. For example, the rehearsal period, you want and need as much rehearsal as possible. So those walls are sort of quite high, and then within that, it's time for play. And it's a complex thing in our business, isn't it, to have the structure that allows for freedom and playfulness, and that negotiation's a difficult one. But you've sort of charted your own territory through that, I think.
It's something I did right at the beginning, like I don't know how come, like for my very first feature, Sweetie, I had 3 weeks rehearsal. That was like a budget of not even $1 million, and it's never got any more or any less. So I don't know how you talk about that, but one thing I think about, the film business is that a lot of things happen like it's the army or something. A lot of the structuring and productions is around habit and forms and previous ways of managing everything, and they're not always efficient, and they don't all, often put in prime place creativity. And it's really good to rethink those methods and figure out what would really work for you. Because, the whole thing about making a film that works or a TV series that works is trying to find something that you can offer that hasn't been offered. Some knowledge, some capacity, some knowing, some brilliance, if you like, that will give to the audience real value.
Just moving now a little bit to the resonance of some of this stuff to Principle of Charity, I guess. I was thinking that, sounds pretty obvious, but it wasn't at the time, that a writer once explained to me ages ago that the secret to creating great on-screen baddies is to realize that the baddies don't think they're bad. They may act terribly, but to them, they are just like we are to us, fully fledged human beings who've got the same sense of reason and righteousness we all have. And I thought that looking at baddies might be helpful to sort of deepen our understanding and Principle of Charity. I imagine that one of the most generous acts of writing or directing is to create fully formed bad characters, or
flawed, I think is what they call them.
Yeah. Trying to inhabit these characters from the inside, who in real life, I'm just looking at that distinction, in real life, you'd probably run a mile from these characters. You might not be so generous. How do you create these characters? Do you fall in love with them? And I guess, does it make you less judgmental, even kinder to real life bad people?
Well, personally, I'm really irritated by alpha men. They just have a way of making the space smaller and, life more difficult for almost everybody, including themselves. And for that reason, it's good to know your enemy,
No, that's not being kind enough to yourself. You brought a lot of love to Phil and generosity.
I'm just joking about that, but it is interesting to me to know my enemy, and to know how they became that way, and actually how lonely they can be there. I am, as I say, really curious rather than judgmental. I'm not really a moralist. That doesn't really interest me. Say, you're bad, you're good,
Right, yeah.
I feel everybody is bad and good, and their circumstances kind of prescribe how much of the bad and the good that we see, And I think people under extraordinary pressures that behave well are just like heroes, Yeah. Those are my heroes. So with Phil, I enjoy characters like him, who, it's hard to use the word baddie. I think what we're saying is that they're powerful and don't have your best interests at heart.
Well, they also fulfill the role as the antagonist in the drama. The characters are...
The worse they are, the more cynical and, bestial, mean, harmful, the better. And then, I think then if you can find some access to their pain and their humanity, say like Richard III, it's quite obvious he's got, a limp and a hunchback. You begin to see the different kind of complexity. And that's where I think things get really interesting.
Yeah, and we're talking here about Phil Burbank, previously from The Power of the Dog, for listeners who don't know. He does play that role of the antagonist in many ways, but I remember coming out of a screening of the film, and some of the people I'd seen it with actually really were on his side in a way that I'd never occurred to me, because not just the Richard III physical impediments. You know, that he had the, you know, such a yearning inside, an unfulfilled yearning.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think that was, you know, like it was definitely suggested in the novel, but I took that a lot further. That, you know, Phil's redemption, I think, is that he's a lover, that he really wants love, you know, that he loved Bronco Henry and now he's falling in love with Peter. And it's bringing up all that heat, all that hope, all that excitement, all that beauty that he had just stacked away somewhere, that he didn't think it was ever going to be part of his life anymore. I mean, I think the thing is with that is that, you know, for me, if you think about what the highest moments in a person's life is, I think, you know, like falling in love and being completely intoxicated by, you know, love and, you know, erotic excitement, or, you know, finding the two combining. There's nothing much more thrilling for a human life, I think, than that. And I guess in a lot of my work, that is what has interested, you know, me. You know, like we all seek it, especially when you're young. I think when you're older, you know, it's not something you're going to have permanently.
Well, it's a way of you're seeing people who might act incredibly badly on the surface, but finding the shared humanity underneath.
Yeah, I think I'm saying something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Talking about moments of elevated human possibility.
Right.
Which is, I think, really interesting, and especially when, you know, a so-called bad character has that hope and possibility too.
Do you think everybody, in a sense, can bring that? Because, I mean, if you can breathe life into characters who do really bad things on screen, create characters that feel, well, to create them, you've got to believe in their internal world. How do we bring that? And can everyone, you think, bring that to our normal lives, where instead of seeing someone who might, Lloyd had an altercation with someone before the podcast and was, you know, pissed off with them, but you have, you know, really
chicken shop. There's a lot of difficult people.
But, you know, we all encounter some really horrible people, but rarely take the time that you did with Phil to unpack the inner yearnings.
Yeah, I mean, I did have trouble, and I did some very unusual things to help myself feel into Phil. I mean, I keep him at arm's length, I think, a little bit to begin with, and then I felt like, oh, this is not going to be a very good film if if I can't enter into the emotional face of my lead protagonist. One of the things, you know, I noticed it was a missing thing, and one of the things that turned up was I was also looking for ways that Benedict might enter into this character who's probably going to have the same issues that I had too with him. And I came upon this idea through a friend of working with this woman called Kim Gillingham, who does dream work. And I thought, I better test this first with Kim before I send Benedict there. But anyway, I think it was the greatest help I've ever had as a director. And I was convinced I wouldn't even come up with the dreams that were supposed to help me, you know, work on the issues in my script. But she had a method of talking to your subconscious, like suggesting that you did dream and then telling me to have a piece of paper and a pen next to the bed so that I could write down any images or anything that happened. And, you know, I tell you what, that next night I did come up with some images and I did write them down. And I thought, oh, nothing will come of these, surely, you know. But it was enough for her to kind of get going and work with. And, you know, through the sort of series of relaxation and working with these images that came up through the dreams, and her having read the script, she was able to kind of facilitate a dialogue between myself, or between Phil and me. And I was playing both roles. So she would say, so Phil, and she'd say, Jane, you're Phil here. What does Jane need to know to tell your story?
Wow, that's principle of charity, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Times 10.
Yeah, and Phil had a lot of doubts that I had what it took.
Did he think you were up to it?
No, he didn't think so. He thought he said in a kind of snarly voice, which was me speaking, like, well, she'll have to take that fucking lab coat off first of all, you know.
Right.
You know, she had to get dirty. She's going to have a chance of understanding. And, you know,
it's the lab coat that's sort of objective.
Yes.
I'm looking in from the outside and judging and commenting and moralizing.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I was doing the talking, of course, but somehow been hypnotized or whatever to be really fluent with it. And I sort of immediately understood, that's right, of course, you know.
And how did she work with Benedict?
I think she did the same work. I mean, it's private work, so, you know, I don't dig into, you know, quite personal. I mean, he might be using quite personal knowledge to do it. Yeah. But all I can say is that I had, you know, really sexual images that came up that were like I was a gay man, you know. And I was sort of really grateful for them. Like, you know, there was a big flower on my lap and in the middle of it was a stamen, which was actually a penis, you know. And I thought of it as this beautiful jewel. And I kind of realized that, you know, I'd always thought, oh, they must feel so much shame. But actually, in his case, I had a different understanding that actually he felt a kind of gloriousness around his masculinity and sexuality, and that maybe with him and Bronco Henry, that something that they felt, you know, it felt so good from the inside, you know, that they see it as a kind of a jewel and a special capacity, you know, a special thing that they can share together. Not a dirty little secret. Of course, they know that everybody else, you know, may think of them as disgusting and immoral or whatever.
And it's interesting because in a sense we're talking about using the subconscious as a way to move from the confines of ourselves with our lab coat on, sort of looking at the world and judging other people, and getting into, you know, because that's what this podcast's about. How do we bring generosity and curiosity to the outside world? And I hadn't really thought about the subconscious as a bridge to do it, a sort of shared subconscious in a sense. I mean, I guess Jung was onto something there. So
I do not know how it works, but I do know that it comes up with stuff that I didn't even know I had access to or thought. You know, like that was it was a surprise. I mean, how can you completely surprise yourself, you know?
Yeah, and how do you know what you don't know? And you in a sense, again, going to the format of the podcast, it's only when you can find a way to come outside yourself through your subconscious or another viewpoint that you can, you know, I guess understand your limitations. I wanted to move forward to a different question, Jane, because I was remembering also to some of the early stages of my career and reading one of this writer's work and the beautifully crafted portraits of characters, you know, from the inside out, and then being puzzled at why they, as a person, were so dysfunctional, who seemed to have no emotional intelligence or ability to read people or interactions in real life. And I've actually seen this quite a lot of times repeated, but I haven't quite worked out why some artists can so sensitively create and imagine other worlds and other lives, but can actually be quite bad at reading like other people in a very more normal discussions or just working relationship. What do you actually have any thoughts on this? Because I have no thoughts.
I don't know the answer to that. No, I don't think I know why that happens like that, but you have to think of it as a blessing that they have this other capacity, you know, to write sensitively and beautifully and thoughtfully. I mean, it may be like the way we present or the persona that we present with is kind of a gnarled old thing, you know, through different battle scars maybe, that they have closed off a little bit in that personal, interpersonal world, but they still have this beautiful capacity to be free in a more
when they're by themselves. They can are free enough or safe enough to be able to enter into other people's.
It'd be extraordinary, yeah.
Be extraordinary.
You know, as you say, it does happen.
Or maybe my only theory actually was more like that. You know, the question of how come psychiatrists or psychologists can be a bit crazy if they seem to understand people so well? Is maybe they've gone too far into the other. You know, they've just left behind the social rules of normal life.
Could be.
They're freer.
It could be, but it doesn't sound like it in your example. It sounds like they don't sound very free, you know?
No.
I mean, I think there really is freedom in the world of imagination. And, you know, a lot of people prefer it to dealing with, you know, true interpersonal work of relationships and things, which can really trip you up. Like, you know, how people really find you compared to how you think you're coming across, you know.
You are in control of your imaginative world, whereas when you're opposite the desk from someone else.
Yeah.
Emile and Jane, can I just add there?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it easier in general to know other people than to know yourself? I mean, don't we generally have a better perspective of other people than ourselves? And it's an illusion that we think we know ourselves. And so hence the question of the actor, the psychologist, the lawyer who believes in, mediation but is conflictual. I mean, it's just really hard to know who you are.
I mean, I do very much agree with that. I don't know. I'm just proposing here that when a new person comes into your world and, it's sort of like your gold standard, like you respond to them and you experience them. And then from your baseline, you say, oh, they're generous, they're not a very nice person, they're whatever, which seems to be quite easy to do. But when it comes to the amount of information you have about yourself, like all your contrary rubbish that goes on in your head that you don't share with anybody, I really don't know how I come across to other people. I get quite surprised by both the compliments and, people that don't like me or say nasty things. Whatever. Yeah.
I mean, Lloyd, I was suggesting that in my experience, sometimes creative people can be worse than the average, but it is. I mean, it is really hard to know oneself. I mean, I did have an earlier question, Jane, which this does link to a bit, is when you're creating characters, do you feel like they are expressions of yourself, or do they somehow stand as children who share some of your DNA but really aren't you? Are your characters you or not you in a sort of primal sense?
Well, for me, characters come like as a voice generally, it's a voice I seem to be able to do.
Right.
And also a speaking voice, but like a way of thinking. They have a way of thinking, or, their dialogue is something that I seem to sense or feel. I've got it in my system, and I don't know how that is. It's like whether it's from experience, or talking to other people, or like having a massive bank of different characters. But one of my specialists is actually a belligerent man.
It's in you.
Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy it. I also enjoy the sort of the playing with it in a way.
The playing with it.
I think it's much easier to play with characters like that than like, the perfect princess or.
And you do bring him to life, don't you? I hear you when on Top of the Lake, you and Gerard Lee, the other writer, you'd play these characters and create them through the act of role-playing and bouncing them around.
We don't know how to do a scene. We'll often like take on the different characters and take turns and see what happens when we're in a little conflict, as similar to the scene. And then we might go, stop, and write that down,
And do they want to do things that surprise you?
Yeah, that's the best of it. The best of it is that it really surprises you by how mundane they are, or something really coming from a different area you just could never imagine. Without that little intercourse of discussion or role playing.
We did a podcast episode on cultural appropriation already, but I would be remiss not to just burrow into some of the challenges that this idea has brought up to sort of to creativity in a sense. How do you think about your right or even obligation as an artist and storyteller to create characters and worlds that aren't your own, to really imagine other experiences? And then, obviously, on the other hand, to respond to this challenge from marginalized groups that it can at times even feel like an act of violence to see characters from, their group created and voiced by outsiders, particularly if there's a history of oppression there. How do you process this challenge to unfettered creativity, or has it been tricky or not?
Well, I can understand what the criticism is about. Like, for example, especially from groups of people, like, say a binary trans woman who's transitioning or something like that, that's very specific, that they are anyway feeling disempowered and misunderstood, and then to be interpreted maybe by someone that doesn't know the experience and has a voice could be really difficult. I mean, hopefully they might say, like listen to the voice, and think, well, actually, I think that's actually really good, or it's all bullshit or whatever, because just because you are a man or a woman doesn't mean to say that you can write, as a man, that you can write men's part better than a woman could, or the vice versa. Like for centuries we've had to put up with men writing women's parts, and some of them have done it really, really well, like Henry James. It's impossible to understand how Henry James could have written a character like Isabel Archer, who's so incredibly detailed and incredible, amazing. Or George Eliot, who was a woman who wrote Middlemarch, is probably considered one of the greatest novels of all time. Write all the male characters, like a crusty old priest, who's such a brilliant characterization. So it really is, to me, and finally, it's in the hands of the capacity of the storyteller and the excellence and extreme gift of them. I think that gives you a right if you do it well. Like the ticket is not, that you are from, that you are that exact person, but that you somehow have lent yourself completely and generously and, with talent and cleverness to it, such that people who do experience that situation, like as a young woman, I thought Henry James's Isabel Archer was amazing, Apparently he had a cousin who was similar to her, and he must have felt it deeply. So, I think research comes into it. I mean, a lot of different things comes into it. But to me, I'd rather be interpreted by someone who's thoughtful and clever and is an extraordinary artist than just someone that fit the bare requirements of similarity.
It's a beautiful response. It's, I guess, research and intention and listening, and then just being brilliant at bringing something to life. But then I think ensuring that there's a difference between doing that and a fraud where you pretend to be a writer who's a different gender or a different ethnicity. It's still coming from you. And I guess if the audience or readers or listeners know that it's a Jane Campion interpretation or it's from Jane's world, then, you're not pretending to be anything other than what you are, I guess.
No, but I mean, I would imagine nobody's doing that unless they're really in some sort of deceitful practice,
Yeah.
You need a certain amount of transparency.
Do you find that you self-censor at all in terms of creating characters without, if you ask your subconscious now, is it going, don't go there, I don't want to create certain characters, or you do seem from the outside to have risen to a level where you've got the artistic freedom to go where you want to go.
I don't think you can boss your subconscious around. I think if you start trying to do that, you'll lose that relationship. It is free, fundamentally free. And, you try to dream the dreams that you want to have, it doesn't work that way. Dreams are instructional in a very magical, crab-like way, in addition to your understanding of yourself and who you think you want to be or whatever, because they will define you, However, you might have come up with a character and you think like, am I going to make a film about this? Like, that's a different question. Because,
do you have to listen to it?
The reviewing world, the world that we live in as, producers, directors, etc., it can be a lot more judgmental and, it could sink a project that had a character that was complicated or difficult to some, degree, just on the basis of, them being, evil, I guess.
Yeah, and following on for this, I was thinking about that question of which muse you follow or whether you follow your muse or not. And I was thinking about this tension within art over the centuries, or as long as art's existed, between pure creativity and art as a tool of politics. I had this imagining of a father in Lascaux's cave telling his daughter to paint a reindeer as more dangerous so he can look more like a hero, and his daughter saying, Dad, I just want to express myself. And I imagine that battle of, what is art used, whenever there's power, it seems to be co-opted by those in power to push their vision of society forward. At the same time, it's also used by those who oppose power to rebel. But what happens to you if one of your characters that your incredible subconscious has proffered to you wants to do something that you think's a bit politically iffy? Maybe you've created a female character who's weak and doesn't end up on top. And obviously Rose in The Power of the Dog was an example we talked about a lot. Or your character's just acting in a way that seems to be antithetical to the political agenda of the day. Where does your duty lie? Which muse do you follow?
I'm most influenced and moved by what I perceive as being, I guess, closer to truth. But that's a very difficult thing to describe, as we all know, it's all contextual. But
the truth of the characters. The truth of the character's experience.
Within the story, like within the context.
The
what feels truthful, surprising, real, rather than following a political line.
I guess you're saying if you boss your subconscious around or use politics to curtail what they're going to do, you certainly won't be surprised, will you? It's harder for them to...
Well, I don't know if you can stop the subconscious. I don't know. Maybe some people have, and that's the scariest thing of all. Yeah, these people that are professional liars, like Cardinal Pell, maybe, some people believe him. I don't believe him. There's others like the, doping scandal, Lance Armstrong. Now, these guys, I just don't know where they are, if they have a conscience or what's happening. And that, I think, is the most scary thing, because I'm really kept in line by the voices I can't stop popping up that go like, oh, this is bullshit,
Yeah.
Or you're a liar, or you're self-promoting now, you're blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you have an inner voice that kind of tends to comment on yourself. But I think it's what kind of keeps keep some honesty in there. And for the people that have actually gone beyond, or maybe they've done things that are so terrible, like, maybe the members of the army in Argentina in the, 1985, terrible things that they did, like the disappeared people, they've lost it. They've lost that relationship with
their conscience and subconscious. I just want to ask you, is there anything else, Jane, in your reflecting on creativity and principle of charity that you wanted to mention? Anything else that struck you about how we can harness creativity to better into the world of other people and to put aside, I guess, whatever blinkers are holding us back, whether it is the subconscious or imagination?
Yeah. I would like to say something. I think that this same capacity to put yourself deeply into another person's place actually comes to good use in therapy sometimes when you've got a problem with somebody. Sometimes the therapist will get you to take the part of the person or just pretend that you're them, like I used to have a problem with my mother. I always feel like I failed her or this and that, and she was a heavily depressed person. And then taking on their feelings, it's just so surprising. It's kind of liberating in a way I don't know if I'm correct or not, or it's another sort of dream. But, what I discovered in her was that she was just so locked in with her depression, when I was playing her, that she couldn't really think about what I was doing at all. She wasn't blaming me for not doing enough or, who's my therapist?
What I love about what you're saying, which I really hadn't thought about before, is it's not just that movement from oneself into imagining the other, but it's actually, if you do that and you really put yourself wholeheartedly, you can be surprised. It's like, there's a whole world of experiences that you even can have access to yourself if you develop a strong enough relationship with the multiplicities inside us all, because we never know ourselves, going back to Lloyd's point. We don't know ourselves, and maybe we hold the capacity not only to know other people, but to be surprised by other people. And I guess that's the work of creativity, to create surprising other worlds and characters. What's your advice as a final question, Jane, for people who want to be more creative out there? What should we do?
Well, I think that it's easy to be creative. You just have to, sit down with some paint or paper and play.
And wait for 4 hours, do we?
Well, there's the two things. Like, it's easy to be creative and enjoy that. It's difficult to be creative and artful. And that's the discipline, that's the really tough discipline. What's
that distinction between, you're saying play and art? What is art?
If you can be creative, it means you can just satisfy those, creative instincts to do some painting and put them up on the wall around your house, which is great.
Yes.
But it's really different when the difference between, art or
It has to be good. That creativity is an expression. Art is good creativity. That's what you're
well,
saying?
yeah, it's within a system that is pretty fierce, it has to have consistency and outcomes
And be
really
original and
into something,
surprising.
and to have a voice, to have an
Have a
original
voice.
voice,
Yeah.
that
And be
has a
disciplined, I
consistency.
guess, as
Yeah,
well.
so there's a lot of discipline that's required in understanding these principles of art making, and then actually satisfying them. And I think I'm interested in them because all the best works that I've loved are involved with that dialogue.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Jane. That was
Thanks, Emile.
I learned a lot.
If you enjoyed this show, the best way you can help us is by leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts and by telling your friends, spreading the word. We will see you next week.
Fantastic. Jane, what a great conversation with Emile. We're going to get straight on to that, what I will now call a dialectical approach on the couch. So let me explain. We always have what's the alternative.
Yeah.
You and Emile chatted a lot about creativity, about imagination. Let me start off with the first question in the vein of the principle of charity, which is always to look at the alternative and understand it, but also to look at one's own limitation of particular views. What do you think the limits are when it comes to being creative in understanding others? How does creativity stop you from understanding others or limit you?
Gee, it seems antithetical, but I'm going to try and play in this space. Well, I think one thing, and this is probably what I would call bad creativity, is that it may stop you listening properly. It may stop you listening to exactly what's in front of you, because you don't like it and you create an alternative fantasy.
So you stay so much within your own world, you and that world becomes so powerful, that creative world, that you can't get out of it.
That could be a way of describing it. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I don't think I listen very well, even to my own partner, and sometimes it's shocked. And when I hear them say something and I think, who are you,
Yeah.
And they're right there and you're used to them. And that's an animal, used to them sharing the same basket or whatever, two dogs lying together or whatever. But there's a sense of not knowing the mystery of their being.
Thank you for that. I'm going to stay within the vein of the alternative. And, in conversation with Emile, you mentioned that alpha males are your enemy. And in the DNA of this show, we're looking to understand the other. Okay, so there's a little bit of alpha there. What's the best case? What's the best case? What's the
alpha? Okay.
What's the best case for alpha males? How do they help the world?
Well, I guess yes. You're helping me here. I think I've always imagined alpha males as being spectacularly selfish and self-serving, but maybe if they use their strength and drive to help others, or people, with less strength and drive. Maybe if the alpha male is angled towards not just winning or self-help, but towards promoting a fairer society, that could be, basically what's saying is, does the alpha male have power,
Well, do they help in any way through their power?
Yeah, do they have power? That's one question.
Sure.
And do they help? Well, I mean, I guess that's a hard one. The Marvel comics would have that they do, but interestingly, it seems to be thought about a little bit. It's like the American dream of the heroic, which is very powerful within their culture or their psyche, has, the Clark Kent kind of guy with the inner hero, who's capable of extraordinary capacities to save, and he's the, that part of him is the alpha, a Superman, and the other is misjudged as not having the capacity. Oh, no, I'm not really answering your question.
No, I hear you. Let me throw in another comment to you is potentially, and I'm just thinking about our conversation and your conversation with Emile and your movies and your artwork, the alpha male has created resistance. It's created resistance in you to them. In so doing, you've brought out the impact that they have on the world and the other side of the story. And I think sometimes in the resistance, people create value.
Well, that's very generous of you. And yes, I think that's. I mean, I don't know how you managed to think like this, but I guess I think that's true. That
here, and
just like I say, it's good to know your enemy.
We inject curiosity and generosity back into our conversations. I think that
my fantasy alpha male person has always to dominate and to win.
Right.
And maybe that's not true. I don't know if that's an exclusive definition of alpha male.
So if there was a well-known alpha male, and I'm going to ask this question to both you and Emile, a slightly different question. But if there was a well-known alpha male in the industry, would you employ them? Would you use them in one of your movies?
Everyone else, here's a quick refresher.
I would probably not, because I don't consider that they have a lot of capacity for self-reflection. Mm-hmm. Like, it's very often that people who are not alpha males play really good alpha males because they know the beast. They've studied the beast. They've had to put up with them. Their father was abusive, whatever it was. So it's hard to say, well, it's really good you're playing this role because you're one of those, toxic alpha males.
Okay. That's fascinating. I mean, that really does delve into the issue of the subconscious and so forth. But I'm going to ask both. Sorry, Emile.
Can I answer that, Lloyd? Yeah, because it comes up so much when we're looking at casting. It's like, do you cast to type or against type? If you need an alpha male character, you just cast an alpha male and then you've got it. But to Jane's point, if their shadow's not there, even as a sort of murmur underneath, then it can feel like quite a hollow performance. And so sometimes, as Jane's saying, you cast the more vulnerable male who can embrace the alpha, and then suddenly you've got like a 360-degree person.
They're also more willing to expose themselves or that character. Yeah. Whereas if you cast an actual alpha male, they're always trying to redeem it, Like, they don't want to. I don't want to do this and say this nasty thing to this woman because I wouldn't say that, or something like that. And you go, oh my God, come on, it's in the script, Yeah. And they really work hard to redeem their character, therefore redeem themselves.
And vulnerability is how we connect with characters. So if you don't have that, but sometimes you get alpha males who have that vulnerability even if they're not aware of it. Maybe is that something possible, Jane? I feel like I've seen that, actors who you feel a sense of the cracks in their armor, but you sort of get a sense that they are not in control of their shadow.
I think it's possible. I mean, I think, that sense of being able to feel someone's vulnerability through their armor is, of course, always really tantalizing, because it's something they've wanted to keep hidden.
Yeah.
And yet they are stressed and exposing it, so that feels really exciting.
Repression is powerful when you feel authentic repression. Sorry, Lloyd.
No, I just want to stay with this for one more moment. Let's stay again in the vein of charity.
Yeah, what's
let's take it. No, let's leave alpha male for a moment, but let me take a slight adjacent to the alpha male question. Let's assume an actor or a crew member had very strong accusations, public accusations of being a racist. Would you, Jane, put them on? Would you put them on your film? Accusations, and maybe they've even voiced views that are antithetical to you. Maybe a pro-Trump supporter, they may be an alpha male supporter, they may see the evolutionary benefit of alpha males. I don't know, but let's assume they were sort of at the opposite. Would you hire them? And Emile, I'm going to ask you that question as well, but let's start with Jane.
It's a difficult question because there's two things you have to consider, and we do consider it in truth when we hire people. Is like now when we have the hashtag Me Too movement and a woke community who are always looking for ways to be controversial. you would have to think twice about hiring someone that may bring negative discussion.
So that's at a practical level.
Film.
At a practical level, like you were referring earlier in your conversation with Emile, but you have to take into consideration.
Well, I mean, if someone voted for Trump, I wouldn't care. Yeah, no, yeah. I would still hire them. I don't feel that's, my business to, or like if they have a religion that's different, like they're Scientologist, or, people don't got their opinions about that. No, I think that's their own private business. I just think all that matters is how they behave on set with other people. If they were rude or overbearing or unpleasant or abusive, then that's a problem. But if
Emile, how about you?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's that question of where does our allegiance lie? What's our purpose here in the industry? For me, as a producer, and I'm working with directors, and particularly in film, it's their voice you're trying to protect, and writers, which is much more in television, although both obviously cross over. But so my allegiance is not, when I'm working with you, Jane, my allegiance isn't to you, it's to the movie, to your movie. That's how I see it to myself, which can annoy people, but I see it as like, my allegiance is to the movie, which is yours, and I'll do whatever it takes so that your movie can be the best that it can be. And sometimes that does involve casting some dodgy characters. I think it needs to be a high threshold. At a certain point, obviously, you're not going to cast someone who's committed a massive crime and is on the run and you're harboring them in your film. Like, you're not going to be breaking the law. If someone's done something and committed a crime and done their time,
no problem.
I mean, I would err on the side of doing what's right for the production and for the film or TV show, but but I guess things have shifted a bit, and that people are less able to draw that distinction between art and the artist. And those two things, particularly with social media, the artist is the art. The artist is the art. They're sort of one and the same. But and that's putting aside the practical considerations that it might hurt you publicly. I would err on the side of the art, unless the threshold's high enough that you start to feel incredibly uncomfortable.
I mean, I think in terms of like. I think that certain sets, and I like to think my sets are like that you can create a kind of chi field of kindness and politeness and support that very few of these problems turn up in.
Right.
On set. Wouldn't you say, Emile, that...
you create a safe environment.
We try to create a really safe, kind, thoughtful and productive environment. And in that case, everyone who's there, who's especially the actors, if they're vulnerable, they're in our care, and we want to see them thrive and to do their best work and to look after them, even if their requests sound unreasonable. You have to understand that every human is really different and can present as difficult one day and extraordinary another, So it's really a job for us never to judge them in their requests, because they can be quite... numerous, can't they? But you just know that they're anxious about doing a good job. That's almost always what they're thinking about. Only that, oh my God, I hope I don't disappoint. I hope I don't, F this up or whatever. And so, sometimes, some actors even feel better if they're in conflict with people, which is where it's most difficult, because someone's going to take the brunt of it. And we noticed that with someone, and it happened once, that we would, say, okay, your turn today to listen to them,
Jane, I want to come to the conversation around truth, creativity, free speech. It's a big theme of our podcast around finding the truth or getting as close to it as possible. When do you think the truth is not good? When do you think telling the truth is not good?
When it's weaponized, I guess.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm not sure what I mean, but it just sounds right to me. I think that, like everything, you say, well, people say, well, it was the truth, and it could have been said in front of a lot of other people in a way where the mission was not to help create peaceful solution, but actually to expose somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I would call it weaponized.
And have you ever chose not to speak the truth, or do you do it regularly? Maybe I should ask, when you've chosen not to speak the truth because, you either want to maintain harmony or, it's just from a self-interest point of view, it's just not worth it.
I would say that definitely I have scales of times when I think it's, depending on the depth and importance of my relationship with the person, or what it's about with the project. Like, say around film, I feel like it's an area where I, really want to know the truth, like what's working, what's not working. Well, even if we can't fix it, we'll say it, right, Emile? Like, we're pretty harsh about it. And it feels good. But, like if I think somebody's made a big mistake or behaved badly, I have to, it's not always my job to go tell them that. You have to sort of consider their capacity or what's important about it. How's this going to change things for the better? So often love and kindness, I think, is probably the way to nurture more truth. Than just saying, "Oh, that behaviour was terrible."
Yeah. Like, actually, it's interesting you say that, because Emile mentioned and Jonah, our producer, highlighted this to me today. I had a slight altercation with a neighbour today.
Goody, we're going to hear this story.
And it was about something very minor, and he just is, he just went off at me, this guy, and there were so many distortions, certainly from my perspective, that were not vaguely close to the truth. And I sat there, and he didn't want to speak to me, and I said, let's chat. It's important to explain our different positions. And he just raved at me for a half an hour. And I decided so consciously not to speak, not to react at all, but just to listen and come from a position of understanding and kindness. And he made terrible accusations that were just clearly untrue from my perspective anyway. But and I said, are you interested in my perspective? He said, no, I'm not. And I left it at that. And I tell you the problem I've just discovered with kindness in argument. And, as you said earlier, the principle of charity really shows up when you're in it. And I really had to be charitable to this fellow, is I am feeling so powerless. There's a part of me that just wants to react, wants some retribution. I didn't have my voice. And I'm, it's just as clear to me that if the stakes were even bigger, how hard it is to be loving and kind in the face of massive provocation. I take my hat off to very religious people, whether they are Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, who are able just to really embrace the walking away and come from that. But I find it hell.
Well,
How do you find it?
You find it a little bit difficult.
How do you find love and kindness in the face of provocation and resistance and irritation and what you deem to be unfair?
Like, I think with the very closest family members, like, my daughter, it's like a practice I have to have, because if I don't, I think I might lose her, and that's something I can't handle, that is. So it's a very good provocation that, sometimes I don't feel she's fair to me, in arguments or discussions, but I know that my job right now is just to listen. And it's really difficult, but I'm so grateful for myself when I don't, say some stupid nonsense back, because it has made a difference, and I feel like she's dealing with a lifetime of me not listening very well, or me being the boss, me being in charge, and now if I don't accept this, change of power, really, we aren't going to have, good relationship. And I really can see that the relationship has improved immensely. And it's fun,
Yeah,
but it did take me to really accept that the person that I thought I was not experienced by her.
Yeah.
She had a lot more complaints.
Yeah.
And
It sounds like she's done a lot of work, though.
I think she has done a lot of work, and I'm so proud of her. But I find it really difficult not to, be right in some imaginary court, of my own making. It's like pathetic, but.
Okay. Well, that's amazing that both of you are able to do that. I want to move on to the conversation around.
But tell me this, Lloyd. Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Like, what are you going to do with that frustration, or was that the powerlessness? Sounds like something profitable, something beautiful in a way as well.
Yeah, it was.
Feel into it.
Yeah, it's a good question to me. Thank you. I actually feel quite proud of myself. It's not something I easily do. I am feeling powerless. I'm trying to be aware of my powerlessness and just keep on labeling it and see the importance of it. Everything else in my body wants to retaliate. And my body is telling me to retaliate. I want to get on that email.
But maybe it's pain underneath it, because that's usually what is always underneath it. Sadness, pain,
Spot on. In this case, it's pain. And, of course, all anger stems from loss. And in this case, maybe it was a loss of status, a loss of, power, whatever it is. So I need to sit with it, and I'm going to do my best not to react, but there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees. I don't know if I'm stronger than my mind or my mind is stronger than me. We'll know in a few days.
Well, neighbours are great provocateurs too. I try not to have any relationship with neighbours.
Yeah, well, and
or just like, hello, hi, how are you?
Yeah. This was a good one. Jane,
could I say though, Lloyd, that Jane's point about the powerlessness is beautiful. It's a very that's an artist's way of seeing the world, because it's like there are ways to redeem these feelings that are difficult feelings, and it's to create something. It's like finding the beautiful in the ugly. You go out on a location recce with an incredible director, and they get so excited about a really dirty, disgusting alleyway because they find the beauty in it, and it's like you're one step removed. There's an artistic sort of redemption there in your powerlessness.
Yes. Well, there's actually a deeper question that's even more disturbing, is why I even feel a sense of powerlessness, which we won't get into today, but that's more disturbing. Jane, I want to come to the question of culture wars. It was touched on with Emile in your conversation around why you also enjoyed the principle of charity. But I'm going to define, let me say what I mean by culture wars. I mean the sort of polarization and conflicts between social groups and the struggle for dominance over certain values and practices, whether they're transgender rights, abortion. How do you see Jane Campion's role in the culture wars? What's your role? You're a big person in the world. You've got power. What's your role in this war of ours that we currently see?
I'm not, to be honest, I'm just not interested in it.
Why not?
Because I want to do other things. Like, what I see as my role in the world is like to give back. And right now, I'm started this film school in New Zealand. It's a free film school. And, I'm working for free, or though costs, I have to admit. And the students have been paid to come. So it's, it's like an experiment going back to, I guess, the Enlightenment days of Gough Whitlam, when education was free. And anyway, we're in the middle of it. And sometimes we have to pinch ourselves and we go like, I can't believe this. This is just too good, We get these great speakers to come in. and the kids are going off, and I mean, not really kids, but the participants are going off, and they're making things, and they've learned how to use cameras, complicated cameras, and do their own sound, and they're filming. Everyone's doing their own filming, and they're making this. Everyone, all 10 of them, made something beautiful. So I feel like I don't know how to manage these discussions. I don't think they're meant to be managed. I think they are noise, And I mean, there's pain underneath it. Yes, I think that, but I don't see anything, that's going to be resolved through it.
Emile referred, and I want to stay within the domain of culture wars, cancellation, deplatforming. You've spoken a little bit about, wokeness and some of its limitations. In our conversation, or in my conversation with Claire Lehman, I asked her why Barack Obama was not cancelled, bearing in mind his previous views on gay marriage. And she replied that there are just certain people who are too powerful to be cancelled. And I want to come back to that question for you. Are you too powerful at this point to be cancelled? Have you got a shield around you?
No, I think I have more of a shield than I used to have, but no, definitely with my off joke at the critics thingy.
On the Williams sisters. Yeah.
There was a lot of activity on Twitter, and I guess I learned a lesson too. I don't think I was really close to being cancelled, but I was definitely being shown a different point of view that I got out of it. Yes, black women have a harder time than white women. Privilege. That's the basis of it, and that sensitivity wasn't there in the joke. So. But, what I don't like is that it just creates this, a kind of atmosphere where women are too afraid to say what they think, So there's no real discourse.
But is that painful event, like all pain now, as a result of that comment with the Williams sister, is that a painful event?
It wasn't them that had the comment, but it was like people that love them. And I did too. Yeah.
Yeah. But let's call it, just say, the social media fallout or some other fallout. Does that painful event, like all painful events, I think for most of us, create some form of aversion in you? And now you are very cautious to the point where, humor. I mean, you just have got, I've just, been listening to you for the last hour and a bit. Your sense of humor, your sense of self-reflection, your honesty about who you are and your family, it's just, it truly is a joy. And I go, does that painful event now create an aversion that limits Jane Campion's honesty and authenticity? Are we going to see less of Jane Campion's inner world?
I think that you would be an absolute fool not to somewhat contain what you say in public. I think it has created a kind of public, personal arena. Like, we would say at the school, no one's allowed to just go off, and we're always in a confidential sort of circle. Mm-hmm. So that there is that freedom. But, I don't speak perfectly all the time, and it's scary to think that you're being recorded that way. I want to learn, but, the kind of heaviness of public censure, that's quite heavy. So, I feel still very free in my own, with my friends and my world. And, you said, I'm a sort of a brand now, but brands are sort of vulnerable because, there's more newsworthiness in them going down than in just anybody.
Yeah.
So, your status is not very protective. It's possibly the opposite. You're more of a target,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's certainly a way, as I work my way up with a lot of resistance at times as being, a female director, when there was a time then, just being a woman made you boring in circles of filmmaking, and what women were interested in was just not interesting to people. Fortunately, that's changed. And it's all about power. In the end, there was just enough women in the storytelling space doing amazing work and getting the audiences that turned it around. And then that got the advertisers on side, and the advertisers then withdrew their money from Fox TV when, the abuse stories were right. And so that you started to see that, women are a big force, market force. It's different now. This is all different now.
How have you responded, Jane, just staying with the issue of women and discrimination in film, how have you responded personally when you've either encountered for yourself discrimination, gender discrimination, or witnessed it? What has been your response? And when you reflect on it now, what would you change in your response?
Well, the thing that I would like to, I think two things. A lot of women work really hard for people like me to have the freedom that I've had in a career, and when they do that work, it's political work, and it actually takes them out of the creative realm, and they don't end up doing the work that they might have done. So I'm very grateful to those women. A lot of them were, gay feminist women in Australia, that created the Women's Film Unit and different things like that. So, they created the basis for a career for a woman like me, who was I was totally focused on the work, on the storytelling space. And I really just tried not to let that distract me. I didn't want to change my focus to the political realm. I didn't feel like I was the right person. I was no Germaine Greer, and look how she suffered anyway, to take up that space. So I just tried to go, I went where I was free, and I felt like I was free there, and I could do what I wanted to do. I mean, the thing I regret is that, in some small ways, I, to be the only woman to win the Palme d'Or for I don't know how many years, 20 years or more, which is a real long time. And, this, it began to feel like, there's something wrong with women. They don't do this well, or what, is something real here, And I never ever thought that, but I sometimes felt a little vanity about the one that got through. And actually, what I'd like to say about that is I'm sad about that vanity, because I'm really sad that, for so many years we haven't heard more from women storytellers. Yeah.
Jane, two more questions. I want to come to the issue of conformity, because we've been speaking a lot about creativity, and I want to talk about conformity. The Guardian described the Jane Campion movie Terrain as having a focus on troubled individuals with clandestine desires whose true nature is suppressed by rigidly conformist values of family and community. And what's the upside of conformity?
That's always been a struggle for me to know. I think school is the place where I really first encountered the not at the request for conformity, but the absolute sort of army-like obligation to it. And I really hated it. I always struggled with it. That it just feels like a blight on the soul. What does it mean to conform to? Conform to the pressures, to the power, to the ideas that. To conform to a positive idea, okay, but conformity doesn't sound like that, does it? It seems to suggest that you are shaping yourself to I don't know, larger forces.
But it would be very hard to have a cooperative, non-conflictual society without some form of conformity. I mean, conformity is in part how culture is formed. I mean,
Well,
subcultures, the movie industry will have its own subculture of conformity, which may suggest everybody should be creative and everybody should be an individual. And, everybody, that sort of Monty Python, we are all individuals type of story.
that conformity.
Yeah. I mean, subcultures have their own rules.
Conformities, yeah.
Yes. And so that if you behaved in a way that was non-conformist to a creative, let's call it creative. I hate that word because so many people are creative in so many different industries, but they would see you as they'd mark you down.
Well, look, put it this way, I don't really care about all the rest of it, but I do like conformity when it comes to the, rules of the road. And and basically the laws of the country, even if I don't agree with them all, that's probably a little bit more problematic, especially, knowing where you guys came from. That is a hard thing to be, to conform to. Let's just stick with the rules of the road.
Stick with the rules of the road.
I think they're, that's pretty grand. And, I'm surprised how well everybody does with it. I'm, considering my own driving, I think, as a whole population of people, I'm enamored with how well people basically do staying on the road and staying on the right side of the road, on the left side of the road as it happens, but, following the rules and not having accidents.
Well, I think on that note, we are going to call it to a close. Jane, I'm going to use 3 letters here. Wow. I just am amazed at, as I said earlier, at your self-reflection. And self-reflection often is, I suppose, signaled through a sense of humor, the ability to laugh at yourself, your ability to explore. Thank you for exploring with us. And thank you for being a massive supporter of the show.
Can we all have dinner together when I'm next in Sydney?
Let's do it.
If you enjoyed the show, we'd love you to leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. It really goes a long way to helping others discover our conversations. You can also find Principle of Charity on social media, where we hope you'll join the discussion. See you soon.